bill?
Scott Simpson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I too want to join with colleagues across the House who are supporting this third reading of the bill. Sir, I had the privilege of sitting on the Health Select Committee in the last Parliament, and during the time that this bill was being considered by the Select Committee in the last Parliament, we also had an opportunity to visit Australia. The Health Select Committee was chosen to participate in a visit to Australia, and one of the things that the Select Committee focused on was discussions with various health organisations in Australia and also the Australian Ministry of Health. And at that stage, sir, it wasn't actually very long since the legislation in Australia had been introduced back, I think it was in December 2012. And so at that stage, sir, the results were really still out in terms of whether the impact had been as great or as widely spread as was expected. And sir, I noted just recently that since that visit, actually the statistics that have come out of Australia now are undeniable. Back in July of this year, Kylie Lindorff from the Cancer Council of Victoria visited New Zealand. And she was able to present to the public of New Zealand some really, I thought, useful statistics. Amongst them was that since Australia's introduction of a similar regime to the one that we are about to implement, that legislation has been now credited with the largest drop in smoking rates in 20 years in Australia. Simple, effective and very meaningful. Kylie Lindorff went on to tell New Zealand media that what they still refer to as plain packaging, but we're now calling standardised packaging, is working much better than they had ever expected. The number of Australians smoking since the introduction of their legislation had dropped by 13% in 2 years. And it's perfectly logical to assume that we could expect similar results here in New Zealand. Studies in Australia have shown since the introduction of their legislation that at least a quarter of that is down to making the cigarette packaging unappealing to the eye. When the Select Committee was considering and hearing submissions from a number of submitters, one of the submissions that I remember being of particular interest, sir, was from a graphic designer who gave us evidence on exactly what the packaging should look like. And of course we came very quickly to an understanding that plain was not the right term. But if we are to think about carrying this legislation further, sir, we might like to, as a House, consider at some stage the actual cigarette sticks themselves. There was actually some quite compelling evidence that showed that if we were to change the cigarette stick from being white with a cork-coloured butt filter, and imagine, if you will, sir, a khaki, horrible, maybe a horrible colour. I didn't mention a colour because I was thinking more of a khaki green or a shameless red or something like that with a black butt. Then, in fact, that might have a further positive impact in terms of reducing smoking. Sir, this is a good bill. I'm very pleased to have been part of the Select Committee process that has brought it to the House. It's been a good process. I commend it.